the new Fallout show came out on Amazon, and I subscribed to Amazon just to watch it. I was hearing a lot of good things just on Twitter alone. Just so many people were saying it is easily the best video game adaptation. It is way better than The Last of Us. And so I was like, okay, seems pretty crazy. It's pretty high praise. Like everyone was saying that. And usually when there's a huge consensus like that, I usually get overhyped and then I watch the thing and it doesn't meet expectations. This time that wasn't the case. I had a great time with Fallout. I think the marketing of the show was actually not that great because the show's marketing made it look a little cheap. It had that made for TV look for some reason. It didn't look cinematic. It looked a bit cheap, looked closer to the Halo show than The Last of Us. But I gotta say, after watching the all 8 episodes of the season, the show looks awesome. There are moments where it's not, amazing, but overall, I thought it looked better than The Last of Us. I think HBO gets a little bit over credited for their production. I think a lot of their shows look pretty cheap, to be honest. They look very much like sets. I think this is just an industry-wide problem. I think there's just more and more. I don't know what it is. That's a whole other topic for another day. But I find a lot of things look very like a play, like you're watching theater. This show, however, even The Last of Us had moments where I'm like, that's clearly a set. That's clearly a green screen 2 feet away from the screen. It's just, you can really tell the budget limitations, but this show actually looked pretty good. And again, it's not perfect, but it actually looked great. It didn't look like a little small made for TV thing. It looked like a legitimate good production. I wish the Halo show got this kind of budget and the creative team behind it. Now, I should say that I'm not a diehard, huge fan of Fallout. In fact, I'm familiar with the series, even going back to the original 2 before Bethesda took over, but I've never actually put in a lot of time or played really any of the games. I just know them just from being in the industry a lot. I know quite a bit about them. I know the feel, the general vibe of them, the music, the visual style, the humor and that kind of stuff. So I know them. I'm familiar with them more so than the average person. But by no means am I an expert like I would be on something like The Last of Us or Sonic the Hedgehog or any Halo, any of the other adaptations, Resident Evil, you name it. With that said, I thought it was great. And my girlfriend has since we've watched the whole series, it's not her kind of game at all. She's actually gotten interested in playing them. So she booted up Fallout 4. Everyone always says don't go Fallout 4. That's, a low point in the series. But I felt like since it was the kind of more recent, it'd be a little easier to get into. And so I made the risky call there. I'm like, should she do New Vegas? Should she do Fallout 3? But I went Fallout 4 just in case. And I'd never played Fallout 4 at all. The only one I really tried to play was Fallout 3, and it just didn't click with me. I'm just more of a Bethesda, an Elder Scrolls guy. And so she started Fallout 4, and I was actually really impressed with that game. It actually looked a lot of fun, and I might actually start my own save file in it too. But I've been watching her play it, and I was actually surprised at how many direct tie-ins, even to the fourth one, there seems to be. There's a lot of similarities, even lines of dialogue and things you find right off the bat. It reminded me a lot of the show. So really cool. I think the show, from my perspective, my limited perspective, I think the show does a pretty good job at remaining faithful to the games. It has some good people behind it. It has Jonathan Nolan at the helm. He's done Westworld. He's worked a lot with his brother Christopher Nolan, and so he says he's a fan of the games. He knows Bethesda's work. So you got some people behind the wheel that know what they're doing, who respect the source material, as opposed to the Halo show, which the creators have openly admitted they're like, we don't care about the games, we don't like the games, we don't play the games. They just seem, and the show suffers. The show's just not any real good. Fallout is a show about it's hard to describe because it's a kind of a strange mix of like a fictional historical thing where it's like it takes place in like an aesthetic of the 50s. It is kind of it is in the 50s, but there's like a futuristic element where they've got robots and, big buildings. So it's a mixture of like a futuristic kind of, it's like a futuristic look of like if the future technology existed in the 50s, and so you've got, an old looking aesthetic mixed with futuristic technology. And in this time, the nukes go off. The world is, I can't remember if it's just America or the entire world. But nonetheless, bombs go off, things are destroyed, and some people were able to get into vaults. A lot of like richer people or privileged people or people who invented these vaults, and some other people were able to go into these vaults around the world, I guess, or around America, and they were somewhat safe from the destruction of the world. Other people weren't so lucky, and life went on the surface, and it didn't fare too well. The people who survived, they have radiation poisoning, they've turned into mutants, or they're barely scraping by. There's, torn up buildings and little communities here and there, but it's called the Wasteland. The surface is called the Wasteland, and that's where you'll find a lot of bad people who will eat other people who will kill just to get a couple scraps or to eat you. And technology and medicine has also evolved on the surface as well. So there's ways at kind of staving off the radiation poisoning you might get. And anyway, so that's the surface, but we don't know anything about the surface yet. The show begins in the vault, and the vault is interesting because the people who are growing up there for generations have no context for what's been going on the surface, and they have a very kind of like wholesome attitude. They're very naive, and I'm just going to kind of summarize the first episode, kind of the beginning points. One thing leads to another. Someone's father, the lead character's father, gets kidnapped, and they're taken to the surface. And so the main character decides, her name is Lucy, she decides she's going to go out of the vault and trying to rescue her father. And the show follows for 8 episodes her experience being on the surface for the first time and all the dangers that come along with that as well. The show focuses on 3 different characters. There's Lucy. I would say she's probably the main character. She is the vault dweller that I just talked about. There is the ghoul, played by Walt Goggins, who is a very interesting character. He is an actor previous to the explosions. He's an actor, and he is turned into what's called a ghoul. So after the bombs, he's a ghoul, and he's basically just slowly dying, and he looks disfigured. He has no nose. He looks horrifying, and he constantly has to take this medicine to stave off his death. If he doesn't keep taking this medicine, he kind of turns into like a zombie essentially. And so he's kind of positioned as, I guess, the bad guy. But there's a lot of depth to his character to show that maybe he's not so bad, or you have to do what you got to do to survive, kind of thing. So he's a well-rounded character. He's not just a pure evil guy, but I would say he's probably closest to what you would consider a villain in the show, at least at the beginning. And then the third character they focus on is someone called Maximus, and he is a guy who joins the Brotherhood of Steel. That is what you might see in the promo images and on the covers of Fallout, the big steel kind of mech armored people that you see on the promotional artwork. These big machines that people pilot, and they are able to do some damage. And so there's a whole other aspect of him, and then the show kind of shows how all these 3 characters intermingle and combine and what happens. But yeah, the show's great. I think it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of good humor. There's some serious moments. There's some depth to the characters. There is a little bit of backstory explored through the show as well, so you can see what happens before you see these characters, before the bombs or whatever they were getting up to before in their past. It does a good job at showing different perspectives, the survivors, the people in the vault. I guess there's also another character. There's Lucy's brother, who remains in the vault. He's also a central character of the show, and he's slowly piecing together maybe some corruption and deceit that he's unaware of the people who were in charge of the vaults. So that's another interesting aspect as well. So I guess there's like 4 kind of central characters. Even though I like the silliness of the show and it gives it a different tone compared to other shows, post-apocalypse or even something like The Walking Dead or The Last of Us, I wouldn't mind seeing the show get a little bit more serious, because sometimes it's a maybe even too silly where I'm like, I wouldn't mind seeing even just one episode where it like really shows the stakes, where it's like, this is what could happen to you kind of thing. So I wouldn't mind like one serious episode, but I do appreciate the humor and the silliness that is in keeping with kind of the tone of the games. But I think the games also are, at least when I played Fallout 3, I felt the game was very void of, at least where I didn't play that long, but I didn't find the game had a lot of humor. It was actually very kind of depressing and lonely and desolate and hopeless. So I wouldn't mind some of that creeping in there a bit more as well. But the show has a lot of different textures. It's not afraid to get really gross. There's lots of blood and guts and mature themes and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised. I would have to say overall, it probably is my favorite video game based property. I don't know if I want to call it an adaptation. This is a conversation that I'd like to have with people, which is basically, are there two kinds of video game adaptations? Because you have things like Mario, Sonic, Resident Evil, The Last of Us. You've all these video game adaptations being made, but I think The Last of Us might be the only one I would call an adaptation, because it's the creators taking the game and making it into a show. Whereas something like Fallout, it's not technically directly taking an actual literal plot from Fallout. It's more so using the setting of Fallout to tell its own story. There are a lot of neat little connections, but overall it is sort of an original tale within the universe. And I don't know if I call that an adaptation. Same with something like, Mario. That's a whole other take in the universe of Mario. Sonic, however, is actually taking the general plot of the Genesis games and putting it into a movie. So that I would probably classify that as an adaptation. But The Last of Us probably, at least if you want to use the same term, it's definitely the most accurate to the source material. But overall, I feel like they kind of dropped the ball here and there in The Last of Us. But with Fallout, overall entertaining wise, I think Hey, thanks for listening to this clip of my podcast. I publish new episodes on the last Friday of every month at 12:45 p.m. PST for all premium members of my Patreon. My name is Cooper Bebo. I'm an actor, writer, and producer of film, television, and video games. Head to patreon.com/CooperBebo. You can sign up for free, get access to my blog, or you can toss me a few dollars if you want to support me and get special bonuses like this very podcast, or you can subscribe to my YouTube. You'll continue to get free clips and a brand new video every single Wednesday. So whether you like to watch, listen, or read, I've got something for everyone. I've also got a video game called Billy Saves the World. Please check that out on Steam right now. I've got movie projects in the works. I update all of that stuff in Discord all of the time. Again, the basic channels are free to join. Just head to patreon.com/CooperBebo to get access. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next clip.